Viewer contributions make local programming possible on WNIN. Become a member of WNIN with your contribution so we can continue to make this programming available. Visit WNIN.org and click on the donate button.
Good evening and welcome to Shively and Shoulders, the first show of the year. As you can see, I'm missing a very important component of this program. Patrick is not here this evening. He's up in IU trying to straighten out the basketball program. Lord knows they need his help. But with me are two distinguished guests. We've had them before. Two of the smartest guys around in terms of politics, Professor Matt Hanka from USI and Professor Robert Dion from University of Evansville. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Do we have anything to talk about?
A few things.
All right, let's get started. Let's start at the national level.
Sure.
So right now we're in the middle of the confirmation of the president-elect's appointments to the various cabinet positions.
Yeah.
And we've had Secretary of Defense candidate, Mr. Hegseth.
Sure.
And we had Pam Bondi. I always want to say Blondie for obvious reasons. Then we had Senator Rubio.
Sure.
Have you been watching any of that?
I watched a little of Hegseth yesterday, and as expected, these confirmation hearings are going to be contentious because people want to know whether or not these nominees in the second Trump administration are qualified. But a lot of this is political theater.
Let me ask you this. People that are watching,
Some people are.
what, if anything, do you think they're really learning in a substantive way?
Well, if you devote a lot of time and watch every question and every response, you may well learn something. But if you zoom out, the big picture is that the odds are very, very good that virtually every Trump appointee is going to be confirmed. The Republicans did very well in the Senate. They've got 53 votes. The expectation is that the president's going to get almost everybody. There might be a few scalps that he loses, but he already lost one with Matt Gaetz. And the expectation is, at best, he might lose, one or two. At the worst would be if he missed one or two.
Professor Hanka, let me ask you this. It appears that Pam Bondi was a good choice. But why was his first choice Matt Gaetz? That seemed like a loser right out of the gate. Why would he do that?
One of the things that Trump has, and it's an instinct, is how things look on television, how things appear to be. So the optics have always been important, and that's not something new about Trump.
Right.
And so he perhaps looked at a Gaetz as somebody who, tall, telegenic, maybe somebody who could carry the message and represent it. Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, same way, sort of handsome, tall, looks good on TV, looks presentable, and that's something that's always been important.
But Matt Gaetz had all these criminal investigations and possible charges being filed.
I think what was happening, and this was talked about last month, and maybe he thought he can get Gaetz through, maybe through a recess appointment or something where the public wouldn't, but that's what we have in our system of advice and consent from the Senate, where there is a vetting, and even if the vetting looks sort of theatrical, it's still a vetting where you give the Republicans and the loyal opposition an opportunity to make their case or ask their questions, like we've seen today and yesterday.
So you're predicting that all of his nominees are going to get through?
If he loses one, I would be surprised. Yeah, I would expect virtually all of them to get through.
And even someone like an RFK Jr., he's going to probably have to make the case on some of his positions a little clearer than some of his other nominees, where it's a little bit about past indiscretions or style. But I think he's going to make a good enough case to convince enough for confirmation. He'll have to put himself out there a little more.
What about this unusual situation with Mr. Musk having so much influence? Mm-hmm. What impact is that going to have in moving the president-elect's agenda and dealing with Congress?
Well, your voters to him, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to run this. They're calling it a Department of Government Efficiency. It's going to be an office because a department at a cabinet level will require judicial action. But this office may be effective in terms of trying to trim a lot of the inefficiencies and a lot of the bloated spending. That there's going to be when they look at this budget, and we're getting to about $7 trillion dollars now. There's going to be a lot that will have to be trimmed, considering that one of the biggest line items in a budget now is debt interest.
Right.
And that's something they're going to have to confront, with obviously moving the debt ceiling up and down, but that's going to be a huge thing. And then looking at all departments, so I think nothing is going to be spared in terms of that. But he's positioned well. He's been able to use his influence in the campaign to have that seat right next to Trump.
Two things real quick about Elon Musk. With respect to Doge, the expectation during the campaign was that they were going to step in and slash $2 trillion in spending. Right. That's just not going to happen, and everybody knows that, and they've already acknowledged as much. He is the richest man in the world, and he has been camped out at Mar-a-Lago, attached himself at the hip to the president, and I'm not sure that's going to last forever. I think we have two really, I'm trying to be nice about this, two large egos, right. two gentlemen with outsized impressions of themselves, and the president is the leader of the free world, and he's got this fascinating friend, but that guy's not the president, and eventually the president, I think, a point is going to come soon-ish when they disagree on something, and Trump is going to say, hey, at the end of the day, I'm the president, and you might want to move out,
What do you expect to happen a week from yesterday? Will he move forward with all these executive orders? Or something a little more less drastic?
I'm expecting two things, and I think you're on the money with the first of those. I think he wants to hit the ground running, and so there'll be some really dramatic and expansive, quick action in the same way that Governor Braun has done this week with his executive orders. There are certain things that he can't do or he can't do quickly, and we're all going to find out that the mass deportation that was promised is probably not going to be as mass or as quick as he was talking about. But the other thing that I'm looking for next week, and I really think this is going to happen, and I'm looking forward to it, is a quiet, peaceful pageantry of democracy where one president relinquishes power to another duly elected president, and we watch that sort of peaceful transition that we all need to have in a country like ours.
Didn't happen 4 years ago, did it?
It didn't happen 4 years ago, and I think people remember that.
In COVID, obviously, there was social distancing at the inauguration, but the January 6th sort of held over. In terms of some things that he wants to do, whether it's what Dr. Dion said, or pardoning January 6th insurrectionists, or other kinds of action, he'll have 100 days to be measured by it. This sort of day one is something he'll have an eager Congress willing to carry this. They have in 2017 he presided over the passage of the Tax and Jobs and Tax Act, and so that's going to need to be renewed at 25. So he'll have to deal with the deficit in addition to these other.
With all this transitioning going on, Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, right, released his report on the insurrection. What impact, if any, do you think that'll have?
Pretty minimal, to be honest with you. I remember years ago the Mueller report came out, and there were times where Ken Starr's report came out, and everybody was looking at the lurid details. I don't think Jack Smith's report is going to go much further than a PDF that a few interested people will look at. It's unfortunate, really, but because I imagine there are instructive things for both parties to learn from that. But yeah, it's kind of, Donald Trump won fair and square. He won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College vote. That brings an end to all these investigations, and Jack Smith could smell the coffee from a mile away and said, I'm out of here.
Let me ask you this. In Jack Smith's report, it's not just a raw data. He reaches certain conclusions, like he could have gotten a conviction, that he could have convicted Donald Trump. Do you think the report would have been more effective if simply the raw data came out with no opining?
Probably, yeah. I mean, Joe Biden says he could have won the election too. I mean, you can't prove a negative because it didn't happen. So,
right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, speaking of legacies, we'll talk about Biden's legacy in a moment, but we had the passing of Jimmy Carter,
right,
longest living former president. He died at 100. The whole scheme of things, what will be the legacy? There's been enough years that have gone by since he was president.
Yeah.
How will you think he'll be remembered as a president?
I think he'll be remembered as somebody who used the platform of public service to make a difference in his community and his world. That as a man of faith, he was able to combine being a person of faith with this commitment to public service. He's an amazing character, and to be able to be that peanut farmer from Plains, Georgia, to be essentially one of our greatest peacemakers to have ever held the office. So he wore so many hats, and he did it with such character and distinction, and a lot of the tributes were very important, and I loved hearing a lot of them. It was just sort of the man and the character that was very important. But it's good that in all of this we did focus on the accomplishments he had as president, that sometimes that's been overlooked. And he's in that category. He's in the club of one-term presidents, and that gets judged in history a little bit differently. Those were reelected, but it was good to see that he did a lot of the good things in domestic and foreign policy, and probably he's going to be remembered as an effective one-term president and effective humanitarian. More so than I think history.
Let me ask you this, both of you. Jimmy Carter was a devout Christian, an evangelical background, and yet the evangelical influence on politics since he was president has really blossomed, become very important.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Carter was sort of removed from that political force that could have been for him.
Yeah.
Tell me what happened.
Well, there's a whole theory about realignment and changes in party coalitions. It used to be that the South was solidly Democratic. The South has always been more evangelical, more Christian than the rest of the country. Jimmy Carter is a product of that environment. But boy, in the last 50 years, the evangelical movement went from being mostly uninvolved in politics to jumping in, but shifting to the right. And the rise of the new right, we talk about the moral majority and Jerry Falwell and all that. I want to say, if I can, that the thing about Jimmy Carter, for me, is it harkens back to a time years ago, 50 years ago, when Birch Bayh could be close friends with Dick Lugar.
Right.
When Jerry Ford and his family could be close friends with Jimmy Carter. And you saw that at the funeral.
Yes,
right.
you did.
And that's right. We ought to aspire to try to get a little bit of that. Let's have the Shiveleys and the Shoulders come together.
That's right.
That'll never be. Well, speaking of legacies, let's talk about President Biden. How do you think history will treat him?
He may need to wait as long as Jimmy Carter did to get a second look.
Yeah, I think what happens with a lot of one-term presidents, that they're looked at with this critical eye, and Biden's leaving office probably a little wounded, the fact that he didn't get to leave on his own terms at 6 months ago when we were sort of meeting or talking about what was going to happen with his campaign having to leave and having Harris and a lot of that. But if in a few years, we're going to look back on some of the accomplishments that happened. And in terms of one-term presidents, he'll go as someone who accomplished a lot.
The legislative record is remarkable. Right. The number of bills that he was able to pass.
Which leads me to this question. What if he had announced early on, beginning of the 2024 campaign cycle, I'm not going to run again. It's going to be an open convention.
Yeah.
History would have treated him differently, you think?
I think you're right about that.
Mm-hmm. He would have treated him differently, and it would have been a different campaign.
Different candidate.
Different candidate, perhaps, or even if it was the same candidate, the vetting would have counted a little bit more. But he probably, in his mind, thought that I beat Trump in 2020. I can do it again. I have this. I can do this.
The only one who ever beat Trump.
The only one who has ever beaten Trump. So he had this, and I think it was just a lot of outside party influence and those within the White House who said your time is up. And I think he's leaving a little wounded, a little bitter and frustrated and disappointed.
Let's move to the state scene. Mm-hmm. We have a new governor, which continues a 20-year reign of the Republican Party over the governor's mansion. How do you view Braun's approach so far?
Well, during the campaign, he talked about entrepreneurial approaches. In his inauguration address, he said we ought to be bold and risk takers. And so we'll see if that comes to pass. The Indiana arrangement is such that the governor doesn't get to call all the shots. The legislature has a lot of power.
Especially when the legislature is in session.
That's it. And they have a long session this year. They're crafting the budget. And the same crew that was in power last time is there again, the same leadership up and down. and they have a big fat supermajority, so they can do pretty much what they want. So we'll see if Braun can get what he wants. I think we ought to give the guy a chance. I think the big question mark is not just Braun himself, but will his lieutenant governor. We got spoiled, I think, with Suzanne Crouch as such a capable, thoughtful leader. The new guy is not the guy that Braun actually picked for himself. And are they going to be able to work together, or is there going to be a little conflict?
I think with Braun, he had an executive order to kind of streamline a lot of the efficiencies of government, including bringing people back to work. And I think that's been a concern for people who are interacting with state government, that during the shutdown, there were a lot of people who weren't receiving, if they were calling, they weren't getting responses from their calls or their emails. And so I think that became something that we need to streamline and make the operations of state government better. So he's created these 8 cabinets.
You think
he's created these
you think he really did that
councils.
for that purpose? Or do you think it was a defensive move to make sure that Beckwith, because of some of those responsibilities, fall under the lieutenant governor?
That's right.
That's a good point.
It's
That was a little bit of both, but to have it where there's these 8, and I was intrigued because during the transition, you probably saw all these councils that emerged. And maybe as 12 to 20 councils of all.
Every morning, there was a new list.
Yeah, there was a new list, and so they will serve and help guide those. So I think from that, that's going to really help the executive branch kind of move forward.
And also give the governor a little bit of buffer.
That's right.
That's true.
The thing that's a little striking is that Jesper all of a sudden is running the state and running our congressional delegation. I mean, Mark Mesper came up.
Right.
The city of Jasper is flexing, is punching above its weight, let's say.
Right. Well, I'll
That's
tell you
a
what,
good point.
above its weight, but I'll tell you what, that is a unique community. I mean, it's kind of an island.
Yeah.
Very strong industry.
Right. Strong German heritage.
Yeah. It's almost like an island within the
Yeah.
state of Indiana.
This legislature's got its hands full. They've got that long session. They've got a 40-something billion dollar budget, but they don't have money to burn.
Right.
Lots of challenges with Medicaid and education and property tax reform. So I'll keep an eye on what's happening up there with our delegation.
And with all those things, education, the budget, tax reform, the House now wants to annex some counties from Illinois. How realistic do you think that is?
You want to say something?
I know. I don't know how it's unprecedented. We would have somebody who would want to leave their state because each state has their own political culture and their own.
I was surprised by Speaker Houston even associating himself with
Right.
that. I mean, what he's doing is he's trolling and he's tweaking and teasing. But, I mean, it's a serious position. They've got a lot to do. And this idea of poking Pritzker in Illinois and saying, oh my gosh, we're going to absorb some of your counties. It's not going to happen. We're not going to annex Canada. We're not going to, well, I don't know, we may take over Greenland. But
Greenland's up.
I'm telling you, I
that's
mean,
true.
it's distressing that when there's a time where there's a lot of serious work that needs to be done, they just want to play games and say, we're going to do that. If you read Article 4 in the Constitution, we can't absorb counties unless Illinois lets us do
Right.
it, and they're not going to let us do it, so it's a done deal.
That's a great point. There's so much on their plate right now. Let's focus. You only have 60 days. You know.
This is an old joke. When my dad was in the General Assembly, they'd do this little kabuki dance beginning of every session. They'd drop a legal description of Lake County and want to gift it to Illinois. And the gift never went through because it was never accepted.
Right?
Right. Exactly.
All right. Talking about education, there's a bill out there right now. It's too bad Pat's not here because obviously a lot of his work is in education, public education. There's a bill being offered to eliminate some school districts. What's that all about?
And it would fall probably on Lake County, as you mentioned, Marion County. There's certain vulnerable areas where there's a possibility that the legislature might dissolve the public school corporation and create charter schools. It's carried by Tim O'Brien, who's my state lawmaker, and a couple others, and it's being pushed, but I don't know how far it's going to go. But it's caused a lot of distress, and one would expect that people like Keith Gamble and the ISTA are going to not let this go quietly. And you really don't want to poke that bear. I mean, when the Red for Ed people start getting mobilized, it gets noisy in the State House.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can look at Kentucky. It brought Andy Beshear to office because of
Right.
that lobby in that constituency. Yeah.
Sticking with the state here a little bit, and going back to my comment earlier, the last 20 years, Republicans have dominated the governor's office. What is in the future for the Democratic Party statewide?
Both parties are going, well, the Democratic Party is going through an reorganization in March. So there will be a new chair.
Right.
The current chair is stepping down, and every county will be reorganized. So there's a chance for reflection, maybe sort of reorganizing, retooling. But yeah, it kind of hurts to lose and then lose again and lose again. It's very deflating. So there's probably going to be a lot of suggestions that there needs to be a new effort to move. Now, McCormick did better than the person who, Woody Myers, last time. And gosh, Braun ran behind Trump and Banks and Rokita.
Right.
So they made as much of a race as they could for a Democratic Party. But yeah, the Democrats, it's no fun to do better and still lose. The Democrats have to figure out a way to do like Stephanie Terry did and win back the city.
Yeah, and I think with Indiana and a lot of states in the middle of the country, there's still those Democratic Party, state Democratic parties are still being aligned with the identity of the national party. And so that people will see someone who's running in Indiana and associate it with the coastal elites. And that's been an effective ticket, if you say, for the last 20 years. That's been something where people have, run in Georgia or whatever and say, hey, you're cozy with Nancy Pelosi or Barack Obama or this or that. So if there can be a way, whether it's Indiana or even strategically nationally, to separate ourselves from that, to have an identity that's true to Hoosiers while upholding Democratic Party values, and then have some candidates that maybe have a little more, I feel like some candidates who have run have not been well-financed, and so they've been, the last couple 8th district candidates.
Yeah, let me throw this out. I'm the state chairman of the Democratic Party. Here's what I would do.
There is an opening.
Evansville, Democrat mayor. Indianapolis, Democrat mayor.
Fort Wayne.
Fort Wayne, Democrat mayor.
Gary.
Gary.
Why are we letting the rural areas dominate the political scene? Why not rally the urban people? Yeah. Is that a key thing, maybe?
Well, you don't want to confine your only attention to one area.
Right.
You want to try to, I think the Democrats could actually, if they did just slightly better among rural voters, they would be back in the fight.
Really?
And if they maintain their support in the urban areas. But if you separate into just urban and rural voters and write off the rural vote.
I'm not saying write them off. I'm simply saying realize where you have power right now.
Yeah.
And realize the issues that matter the
Sure.
most. And I think maybe some of the issues that the Democrats have focused on in urban areas have not been important to those in rural areas. So there has
Property taxes, for example.
It's a very important one. Education, a number of those sorts of things. But that gulf, if we don't watch it, is going to get wider and wider. And this happens in Indiana, a lot of places where you have Democratic islands. And that's not good for the health of a state or even the nation as a whole.
If I could jump in on that idea, sorry. The Indiana Bar Foundation conducts the Indiana Civic Health Index every election.
Right.
Voter turnout is down in Indiana, down from the last election. The elections are less competitive than ever. A third of the elections for the Indiana General Assembly were unopposed, like mine in Tim O'Brien's case. And so it's really depressing to see that we're pulling away from civic engagement because the two parties are not competitive, and it's been one-party control for so long. So I think there's a crying need. I think everybody wins when there are two genuine alternatives.
Because then what happens in our legislature, you have these super majorities, and you have some factions within both chambers that are going to, you're going to see some that are going to poke Governor Braun and make his life miserable. They did a little of that with Holcomb.
I want to stay on this theme for a moment. You are a student of Kentucky politics.
Yes.
Doctor, let me ask you this. Brashear has really, he has thumbed his nose at the Republicans, so to speak.
Right.
He's been very successful. He's very popular, even though the state is, in many respects, very red. How was he able to do that?
Well, he's able to do it because he ran against, if people feel like they have animosity or dislike towards Trump, it was just as equal with Matt Bevin, who was the last Republican governor. So he's considered one of the least popular political actors. and he barely beat him. So that helped a little bit. And of course, he did it by rallying teachers and all that. And the fact that voters in Kentucky have been voting for a Bashir for 40 or 50 years.
Right.
So there's some factors of having an unpopular, albeit he's been in office 5 years, and then having the family name brand has helped him a lot, that I think he's going to struggle to kind of have that identity nationally. But at least he's taken the car out for a spin to test this and be, the fact that he's been able to work. But it's going to be a bit, because this won't last forever. And he's seen as sort of the last bastion of Democratic leader in Kentucky right now.
And the time we have left, why don't you make some predictions here? Trump went through cabinet appointees like some football teams go through coaches, okay? Who do you believe, assuming all Trump's nominees get confirmed, who will be the first one to go either voluntarily or involuntarily?
You talking about in 18 months or 2 years, or when their time is?
Within a year to 18 months.
There was a story in Politico this week that said Marco Rubio is really an exceptionally talented, well-placed Secretary of State, but he's probably not going to last more than a year. I don't know if that's true.
What was the reasoning behind that?
The suggestion was that he's bound to butt heads with the president. The president wants a certain thing a certain way, and of course the job of the Secretary of State is to be diplomatic, which sometimes the president might lack. And so they might. And of course, they had that whole disagreement when they ran against each other in 2016.
Right, 2016. I was going to say the same thing, Secretary of State, because he was on the outs his first time around with Rex Tillerson.
Right.
Now, Tillerson was not bad. He was a poor match for Secretary of State, but and he was sort of out soon. So I can see, for this standpoint, him leaving early because he's just going to butt heads too much and outshine. So a lot of these, maybe Robert F. Kennedy Jr., depends on how much publicity he wants for some of his positions. But they have to be careful not to outshine the star, if you would,
So you both agree that Kennedy, along with all the other nominees, is going to get confirmed?
Yeah. And I think he'll have to explain his positions on vaccines, probably, maybe drive down a little bit more in detail than maybe the other nominees.
Like Hegseth, he might have to change. He might have to have a last-minute conversion and say, I said this, but now I believe this.
Okay, that being said, there's a lot of concerns by a lot of people who didn't vote for Mr. Trump, that the rule of law has been crippled by his being elected. It's going to be up to the courts to maintain this democracy. You foresee any changes in the Supreme Court in the next 2 years?
It will be in terms of potential retirements. I could see maybe one opening of a liberal. Sotomayor is not in the best of health. Her age is not as advanced as the ones that have been replaced, but I can see that.
I'm glad to hear you say it, because she and I are the same age. So.
Yeah. So I can see, but she's had some health challenges, and so I can see a vacancy. When we've had these vacancies, it has been, we're not removing the Supreme Court justice 10 toes up, if you will. That they're taking a break from this and saying, I want to retire. So I can see a retirement.
It's possible. I mean, nobody expected Scalia to disappear the way he did. But I think, as for the few liberals who are left, not a one of them is going to retire voluntarily.
Right. It'll take some catastrophic event.
Unless something. So, but at the same time, it could be that they don't want to deal with a mess either. But for the health of democracy, they're going to hold on. But it wouldn't surprise me if one of them did leave too.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate the discussion.
Thank you.
You're very insightful. We'll see if it all comes to pass. We'll see how successful the new governor is and the new president.
It'll be an exciting first 100 days, that's for sure.
We'll have you guys back on Shively and Shoulders again soon.
That'll be great.
We'll see you next month. Take care.
Thank you.